Hi, everybody. It's Mark Layden. I'm the Chief Executive at CyberGrants, and I have a outstanding session that I'm super excited to do with you today. I am joined by my friend and colleague and partner, Ted Hart, who is the Chief Executive at Charity AIDS Foundation of America, CAF America, an author, a podcast leader, and just all around great guy. Ted, are you there?
Hey, Mark.
Hey, there you are. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah. You probably haven't been in one location this long in a long time, have you?
No, it's a bit tough for me to get used to only being at home most of the time and in the office one day a week.
Oh, is that your office has remained open? That's great. Yeah. But you're like me. This is the first time I think in about 30 years that I can't tell you where my suitcase is.
That's right. Yeah.
It's just crazy. Well, and how are things going at CAF America during this process? Everything okay?
Well, it is. Our staff is doing great, working hard, and the charities that we support, as you'll see in some of the information we're going to share with you, are going through quite a tough time. But the donors that we work with are really stepping up and trying to help during this global pandemic.
Yeah, listen, first of all, thank you for bringing that up. I have had the opportunity to follow, the series of surveys that your team has been doing right from the start of this incident, the pandemic that is. And it's a remarkable set of data and information that has been extraordinary. Why don't you take a couple minutes to tell the team about it, and I'll keep them informed as well. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so we've been asked, how did CAF America know to start gathering this information and start surveying our charities so early on in the global pandemic? And it's really part of our DNA to keep our donors informed. And right from the beginning, our donors really wanted to know what was going on. And of course, we have a global footprint. We fund in 125 countries. So we began reaching out to charities to find out how were they doing, what were they experiencing, and so then our thought leadership team put together the very first survey, reaching out and put together the first report, which was groundbreaking and really sort of heartbreaking.
Yeah.
In what we learned and came out in the voices of charities facing COVID-19 worldwide. And we've done a report each month since then, delving in and bringing to our donors what they need to know so that they can tailor make the grants to what's really needed around the world.
That's right. And you said you've worked in 125 countries, but hundreds and hundreds of organizations have been involved. I think it said something almost 2,000 organizations were part of this program as well.
Yeah, well, that responded that were part of the survey. Of course, CAF America has 1.8 million charities around the world that are eligible with us that we can expedite grants to. We reached out to charities all over the world so that we could give our donors truly a global sense of what was happening, and wanted to give a sense and give data that could really be used from on the ground.
Yeah. Tell us a little more about the scope. I know that you give in 125 countries. Were you able to talk to not-for-profits all across the globe in most of those countries?
Well, almost immediately, our advisors and the folks on our team began receiving information from charities that we were already funding, asking questions about how funding could be used, asking questions about grants that were already in the field on possibly repurposing some of those funds, hearing from them on what some of the troubles that they were having in utilizing funds or reaching some of the populations that they were providing services to. We started providing some of that information back to donors, and we very quickly realized that these issues were global. So as you can see from this map, we started hearing stories from around the world. So we then, in our surveys, reached out to charities around the world so that we can then give them a voice and to provide this report back to all of our donors who are, of course, keenly interested to know what's going on.
Sure. And these charities were in all sorts of different groups. So you weren't focused on particularly those charities that were responsible for, COVID response or specific. You talked to a bunch of different kinds of groups.
That's right. I mean, obviously, first responders and those that are providing direct COVID response are immediately top of mind for many of us. But all the charities that are providing support to communities around the world are desperately needed by those communities and are affected by all sorts of things that are happening. So what we wanted to show in this report is that we were not just focused on those immediate first responders, but wanted to hear and give voice to charities of all sorts. You can see here the broad breadth of the kinds of charities that are represented in the reports that are coming from CAF America.
Sure. But having said that, many of them feel like a lot of what they do is relevant in the COVID world, even though, according to this chart anyway, about half of them felt like they weren't really part of that response.
Well, of course, Mark, as we all learned very early on, is this is not like a fire down the street or even a hurricane several states away, but a global pandemic like this. What we learned, and we're able to report through these surveys, and you can see here that nearly 53% of the charities responding were providing some sort of COVID relief. Even if they weren't what you might consider to be direct first responders. So these are not necessarily hospital workers, but these are charities that are at food banks. These are charities that are providing service to vulnerable populations, including frontline relief. So what we're provided in here is a breakdown that of the roughly 53% of the charities responding that were providing some sort of COVID response. About 35% of those were frontline relief services, healthcare, those providing PPE, but then 61% of those were essential services. So these are shelters, nursing home, food bank, and then another 5% of others, refugee support, advocacy, domestic abuse support, which, as unfortunately we heard, with people sheltering, needing to be at home, there was an uptick in domestic abuse as well. So lots of different kinds of services that then all started becoming part of the response for COVID.
Yeah, and the need in all those areas continued. I actually found the global view of this, fascinating from the standpoint, like this quote, even though there are plenty of places in the world that are not yet affected by the virus itself, they're affected by the disruption in the global supply chain, for example, and all those things. And so there's still plenty of need around the world for all of the services out there, right?
Or like places like South Africa, where the effects of the virus itself are not really the problem. It's the secondary problem of hunger throughout the country, and that's elevating because of the disruption of travel. The disruption to tourism, which is so important to the country, and so many people who have lost their jobs, who now no longer have a means to provide for their family. And that's just one country of many countries where the entire economy has been disrupted. And so that then falls back on a lot of charities that provide for that social safety net, which has now become frayed.
Yeah. And I think we have heard a ton about the not-for-profits being injured, but in your reports, and as each of those reports came out, and so the third one came out just earlier this week, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. That's
really sobering. This report was really sobering, Mark. If you want to share the next slide, in this third report, what we were seeing in the first couple of reports is an indication on the part of charities that they were, of course, trying to innovate. Right? They were seeing a reduction in their funding. They were seeing an increase in expenses. They were seeing a decrease in volunteerism. Many times, corporate volunteers that they were counting on were now being required to stay at home and were no longer able to volunteer. So a complete disruption of the charity social safety net, if you will, that makes charitable work possible, was now a problem for charities themselves. And what we saw in these reports is that 90% of charities were reporting that they have been negatively impacted. So in the third report, we wanted to start asking questions about these innovations. What were charities doing? What did they think the future had in store for them? So if you want to go on to that next slide, Mark, because here's where it really starts becoming quite sobering.
Yeah, I mean, you'll come to this, but in one of the earlier reports, I read that 97% of the charities polled said that there was a reduction in some forms of their income, and yet a third of those said that their expenses were actually increasing. And I know what that means in business. It can be complicated.
It's not any different in charity work. If your income is going down and your expenses are going up, even if you're able to provide your services, but suddenly now you've got to have PPE, you've got to have sanitation, you've got, there's all sorts of things that happen. This is really what the result is, and what we're seeing in this third report is that a third of the charities are saying that they do not believe that they will stay in business. They believe that they will be closing their doors within 12 months. And another third simply don't know what the future will hold for them. They may close, they may not close. The future is so murky for them. You put those together, it is possible that 2/3 of the charities around the world are in danger and possibly could close. Only a third of the charities reporting believe that they can hold on, that they can remain open through this pandemic.
Yeah, and that's in the world that we know today. I mean, the next piece of information I thought was interesting as well. It's not just a black or white issue. So perhaps there are charities that are getting a lot of attention as a result of the work that they do, but there's a sort of spectrum, right? Of we can't make it, we're going to go out of business, to I'm really damaged and it's going to take us a long time to recover.
That's right, and I think it's that recovery, Mark, that you're so right about. And so many donors that CyberGrants works with, that CAF America works with, are trying to step up, are doing more, are really trying to support that safety net, if you will. But there's so much need, and there are so many charities. What charities are seeing is that, unfortunately, their new normal, even if they hang on, may be a less supported future, but one that requires them to provide more service with higher costs and less income. And as you said, that's a very dangerous equation.
No, I think that's right. I mean, and we're going to talk a minute about what donors can do, but I don't want to leave the impression that not-for-profits aren't being, I think, really innovative in the way that they're approaching the issues that are in front of them. I spoke earlier in the conference about kind of the agility of our not-for-profit partners, and as well as them partnering in different ways. We were talking with, as we know, it's not just about the resources that they don't get access to in terms of volunteering or funds, or it can be just an interrupted supply chain. In the course of discussing this with our not-for-profit council, Feeding America, for example, was talking about, and we've all heard these stories, right? That they're competing for the same materials that we all know are no longer on the shelves that we were shopping for, right? And they told me the story of, and then of course we're also hearing that the food producers are having to, get rid of their product. In some cases, farmers are turning their crops under or dumping milk and things of that nature. And they've partnered with corporate sponsors to create their own supply chain, get refrigerated trucks and people that have very good, capabilities with logistics. And so they're really doing things creative. So they're working hard to make sure that their mission is which continues to be vital, is attended to. But
stories of charities that were of food banks that were having workers live at the food bank so that they would not be getting infected by going outside of the food bank, so that they could have trusted people there to distribute food, of trying to find ways to have people come and pick up the food remotely without having to come into the food bank. So yeah, lots of creativity of charities trying to meet their mission with families in many cases who never thought that they would be accessing the services of a nonprofit organization.
Of course, absolutely, all around the world in all kinds of ways that nobody expected. I mean, and very suddenly. And so, Ted, I know you work with some of the world's best not-for-profits and best organizations, best corporations and foundations that do donations. And so I think our population, our audience today would be fascinated to know what your findings and your recommendations are that they can do to help, make this better.
Yeah, so let's move on with some of the slides that we have here, because you're absolutely right. Many of the donors have stepped up. They've made a lot of changes to the way that they have contributed to charities, and so many of the charities themselves have been struggling and trying to find funding. If we move on to actually the next slide, what I want to share with you is a number of different things that funders have been doing that have made a real difference, a concrete difference for charities. They have provided extensions to grants. They have rewritten the purpose of grants that are maybe already out there. So the grant was already there, but now working with the charity to allow those funds to be used for immediate needs. Flexible funding, where perhaps there were restrictions on the funding in the past, but now working with that funder, freeing that up to be used for PPE or other needs for the organization. Need-based funding, and I want to talk a little bit about this because, particularly for funders who are giving from the United States and using expenditure responsibility, of course, those funds do have to be restricted. But working with an organization like CAF America, who's an expert in international grant making, in both equivalency determination and expenditure responsibility, it's possible to work with a charity to fund everyday expenditures and restrict it for those expenditures. And that can oftentimes mean all the difference for a charity in being able to meet the needs during this global pandemic. So there's a lot of different flexibility options that donors are now availing themselves of that perhaps just weren't thought of before. And we're so proud of the funders that we are working with that are reaching out and being quite creative in the way that they are funding the charities, and the charities are really responding and able to be creative in their own right in providing services to the communities that they provide service to.
Right. So, and they can, for those of you that work with you, you help them make the adjustments in their grant policy.
That's right. So because there's obviously documentation that needs to be redone. There is oftentimes, sort of a renegotiation of the terms. Because what's important here, and I think what you're referring to, Mark, is that just because we're in the middle of a global pandemic doesn't mean that IRS regulations are thrown out the window. So international grant making still needs to be regulatory compliant, and of course, that is the hallmark of CAF America's work. So we're going to, working with donors that work with CyberGrants, we're going to guarantee regulatory compliance of all of those grants within the context of greater grant extensions, flexibility in grant purpose, need-based funding. So all of these tools that are available still have to be done within the context of solid regulatory compliance.
And it's easy, I think, for companies. We always talk about safe and efficient giving. It's easy for us to get kind of ahead of ourselves and miss a step. And, that's the kind of thing we have to just be really diligent about because, particularly at these times, there can be nefarious individuals that get involved. And so the proper vetting as well as the proper documentation relative to the tax implications are.
And sometimes, Mark, it's just a good heart, right? I mean, it's just, people who are like, maybe we need to dispense with regulatory compliance because there are people in need. And we often think of CAF America as maybe just, taking half a beat to, just have a little bit of a cooler head to say, yes, your good heart is in the right place, and we're going to make sure that your good intentions are fulfilled and regulatory compliant at the same time.
Exactly, in the proper way, regardless of the country.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. There's one more here that I think you want to touch on, which has to do with the way these funds are being used, I think. Is that?
Yeah. So it's really important that, obviously these charities have, a lot of stress. And how are these funds, what are we seeing right now in terms of the greatest need? Where are these funds being deployed? As you can imagine, salaries are always the largest expenditures for most charitable organizations, but also most vulnerable, right? So when funding gets tight, it's the biggest challenge are salaries. But we're seeing a lot of money needing to be put into IT and technology. Charities oftentimes are sort of the hand-me-down technology folks, but now that many times charities are trying to retool with their employees working from home, they need to have technology to be able to do that. Many of them don't have that. So we're so proud of a lot of our corporate funders who are providing that lifeline or providing that technology. And you can see some of the other expenditures here, but for someone to be put in a position of defaulting on a lease or defaulting on other expenditures during the global pandemic, we have a number of really, really terrific donors, many of them working with CyberGrants, who are reaching out and providing the funding to make sure that those defaults do not happen.
No, that's right. And I, we were talking earlier. Of course, I'm going to talk about technology. Of course,
of course.
But we were talking earlier about the challenges of that, because you point out these are not necessarily, with the look, there are those that are very, very sophisticated from an IT technology perspective. But I would say in general, not-for-profits, that's not the focus of their effort. And I think in this particular world, it's been very challenging. We see this as an opportunity for companies to take advantage of virtual volunteering and other techniques to help not-for-profits make that happen. And in this world, it's really necessary, I think. So, so I think that's all really good advice. Ted, the other thing that so first of all, I think most people understand that you and I and our two companies have worked together to try to create a really efficient distribution capability, both internationally, but also domestically. I think that's proven to be really important in this world because, getting the funds and the resources as quickly as possible to the point of impact in the most safe and, regulatory compliant way was the goal. And you're actually doing more now to try to make those payments even faster. I think you've increased the.
That's right, moving even faster. Mark, the way I like to think of it is, our two companies, our charity and your company came together, and it was a really good idea to do that before the global pandemic. But the fact that all of that was in place way before the global pandemic hit allowed us to move faster, move farther, and be able to meet the needs of both the donor and the charities around the world in a seamless manner. So there was not even a moment that when a donor called or a charity had a need, that CyberGrants and your technology and CAF America and our wherewithal and experience were not able to come together and immediately click in to meet those needs. And I want to thank you and CyberGrants for being there to help us meet our mission.
That's so nice of you. I wasn't fishing for a compliment there, but I appreciate the acknowledgement. No, I do think it's important. We've talked about agile social impact for a while, and there's a bit of a repeating theme here. We came to those conclusions because it felt like even a couple of years ago, the world felt more uncertain, and change was happening at a higher frequency and a greater velocity. And so that's one thing that technology can do for you, is offer the notion of agility, where when it happens, you're ready to do it. And if you need to increase frequency or speed or those sorts of things, I think that's useful. So obviously that's why we're doing it. So that's great. Yeah. What's up for you next in this world? I know you're talking about this survey all over the place. By the way, I just want to congratulate you on all the recognition that you've received And forgive me, I know we talked about a Harvard Business School is doing a thing on that.
Yeah, incredible.
What are they doing again?
Incredible. They got a bunch of professors together to actually talk about CAF America's research on COVID-19. So we're very proud of that. What comes next is CAF America will be doing our next, so what we call Volume 4, will be looking at donors and donors' response during the global pandemic. So be on the lookout for Volume 4 from CAF America. We'll be holding up the mirror and giving voice to donors and what their experience has been like in being a donor during the global pandemic.
Well, I think you're a great resource, and I'm also going to give you a commercial here for your podcast, which I'm taking the time to listen to. I think a lot of your experts get on that and are able to give some really, really great advice. I think you've got one coming up that's going to talk through that on June 16th, and there's some pretty good content that's already been scored that people can access.
Yeah, that's part of a series. It's called From the Front Lines, where we actually have advisors who are working with donors and providing some of the top questions that we are asked, and we provide those answers. So donors who have not had an opportunity to call in or just wondering what are others asking and what answers are being provided, those are provided in that podcast. Thank you also for providing access to cafamerica.org on this slide. And you'll see right from the beginning, CAF America has provided access to the eligible organizations that are providing COVID relief on the ground. And these are validated charities that are providing service. You'll see right now there are 256 charities in 55 countries. And if you click through on our website, we give you all the information on how you can give to those charities and the kind of service that they're providing. This has been, as we've been told, invaluable to the corporate world from the very beginning of the global pandemic, because as you said earlier on in this session, there are some charlatans out there who, when there is great need, really take advantage of others. And CAF America has always taken it as part of our charge to help donors avoid that and to make sure that their money is going to eligible, well-validated charities in a regulatory compliant way.
Yeah, no, it's great. Look, we're thrilled to be your partner. I think your team and our team have worked together in a spectacular way to make it more effective, more efficient, demystify this. I would suggest to our team that if you don't know what expense reconciliation means or equivalency determination, they should call your office. And my guess is you'll be able to send them to the right resources. So,
Guaranteed.
Yeah. Now, we love working with you guys, and we really appreciate it. So I'll wish you adieu, and I'll thank you for your time, and I'll let everybody know that Charity AIDS Foundation of America and CyberGrants are good partners, and we'll look forward to doing more together. Okay.
The very best. Thank you, Mark.
Listen, in the future, let's do one of those elbow bumps in person.
You got it.
All right, buddy.
Thanks, Mark.
See you later. Thanks, guys, and we'll talk to you all soon.